The world notices expensive suits before it notices tired eyes, and that is how it often misses the people carrying the heaviest burdens. Rain tapped steadily against the windows of the nearly empty city bus as it rolled through downtown Chicago just before 10 o'clock on a cold Thursday night. The streets shimmered beneath rows of amber streetlights, their reflections stretching across the wet pavement like ribbons of liquid gold. Most commuters had already gone home, leaving only a handful of silent passengers scattered throughout the bus. Some stared through rain-covered windows. Others scrolled absent-mindedly across glowing phone screens. Near the very back, a young woman slept so deeply that she never noticed the bus passing one stop after another. Claire Bennett leaned against the cool glass with one arm wrapped protectively around a faded backpack resting on her lap. Her navy blazer was neatly buttoned over a white blouse, although both showed unmistakable signs of another impossibly long day. Loose strands of blonde hair had escaped from the simple ponytail she had hurriedly tied before sunrise. Dark circles beneath her blue eyes quietly revealed weeks of exhaustion that no amount of determination could completely hide. Her breathing remained slow and peaceful, the kind of sleep that only arrives after a person has pushed far beyond ordinary limits. Across the aisle, Ethan Brooks looked up from the financial report displayed on his tablet. At 39 years old, the founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Capital rarely rode public transportation, but an unexpected mechanical problem with his car earlier that evening had forced him to take the train and then the final city bus home after a late meeting. Dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that contrasted sharply with the worn fabric surrounding him, Ethan naturally noticed details other people ignored. He noticed that the young woman's shoes were clean despite their age. He noticed the carefully repaired strap on her backpack. He noticed that she held the bag as though everything important in her life was inside it. The bus slowed again. The driver called out another stop before, closing the doors and continuing through the steady rain. Claire did not move. Several more minutes passed before the bus entered a quieter industrial neighborhood where nearly every storefront had already gone dark. The electronic display above the windshield flashed one final destination. The driver glanced into the mirror and announced in a tired but friendly voice that they had reached the end of the route. One passenger stood, then another. Within moments, only Ethan and the sleeping young woman remained. The driver looked back once more. "Ma'am," he called gently. No response. Ethan hesitated for only a second before walking toward the rear of the bus. He stopped a respectful distance away and spoke quietly enough not to startle her. "Excuse me. This is the last stop." Claire opened her eyes suddenly, confused by unfamiliar surroundings. Panic spread across her face as she looked through the rain-covered window before checking the time on her phone. "Oh no," she whispered, immediately standing so quickly that her backpack slipped from her lap. The zipper had never been fully closed. Papers scattered across the bus floor. Claire hurried to gather them, clearly embarrassed. Ethan instinctively bent down to help before the papers became soaked by the rain drifting through the open bus door. As he reached for two sheets lying side by side beneath the seat, his eyes paused for only a brief moment. Both were payroll statements issued only days apart. One listed 89 hours worked. The other listed 36. Different employers. The same week. Ethan quietly handed them back without saying a word. Claire accepted them with both hands, her cheeks turning slightly red as she quickly slipped everything back into the backpack. She thanked him with a polite smile that seemed almost automatic despite the worry now filling her eyes. Outside, the rain continued falling across the empty street while the final city bus prepared to pull away, and neither of them realized that two ordinary payroll statements had just begun a story that would quietly change both of their lives. Claire pulled the backpack tightly against her shoulder as though holding it together might somehow hold the rest of her evening together as well. The bus driver offered an understanding smile before switching off the interior lights. "Do not worry about it," he said kindly. "Long week." Claire managed a small nod. "Long month," she answered with a tired laugh that carried more exhaustion than humor. She stepped onto the rain-soaked sidewalk and immediately looked around. The streets were almost deserted. Storefronts were dark. Traffic had become little more than an occasional pair of headlights gliding through the mist. Ethan followed a few steps behind, pausing beneath the bus shelter as the vehicle disappeared into the night. Claire unlocked her phone again. 3 missed calls. 2 unread text messages. 1 voicemail. Her expression changed instantly. She pressed the phone against her ear while walking beneath the shelter from the rain. A familiar woman's voice spoke gently through the speaker. "Hi, Claire. Lily is asleep already. Do not rush. I stayed a little longer because I knew your shift ended late. Everything is fine. Just drive safely." Claire closed her eyes with visible relief before whispering, "Thank you." She typed a quick reply, thanking her elderly neighbor for once again watching her 5-year-old daughter without asking for anything in return. Ethan looked away, pretending not to notice. Some moments deserve privacy. Claire opened a rideshare application, stared at the screen for several seconds, then quietly sighed. The estimated fare displayed $48 because of the heavy rain and late hour. She locked the phone without requesting a ride. Ethan glanced toward the nearly empty street. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked politely. Claire shook her head. "No, it is about 6 miles from here. I can walk." Ethan looked down the long stretch of rain-covered sidewalk, disappearing into the darkness. "At this hour?" Claire smiled gently, though fatigue remained written across every feature of her face. "It would cost almost an entire shift to pay for the ride. I would rather save that money." She adjusted the backpack once more before beginning to walk. Ethan noticed the careful rhythm of her steps. She was clearly exhausted, yet she never complained. "That is a long walk in the rain," he said. Claire slowed for only a moment before answering. "My daughter has kindergarten tomorrow morning. She likes when I make breakfast before school." She smiled again, this time with quiet pride. "She thinks pancakes taste better when I make them before the sun comes up." Ethan could not help smiling. "And do they?" Claire laughed softly. "Probably not. But she believes they do." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Rain continued falling steadily, creating gentle ripples across puddles gathered along the curb. Finally, Ethan asked, "Does she know how hard you work?" Claire looked toward the glowing city skyline in the distance. "She knows I work." After a thoughtful pause, she added, "I hope she never feels the weight behind it. Children should believe adults can solve problems. They should not have to carry those worries themselves." The simplicity of her answer settled into the quiet evening more deeply than Ethan expected. During years spent negotiating multi-million-dollar agreements, he had heard countless speeches about leadership and responsibility. None of them sounded as honest as those few words spoken beneath a rainstorm by a stranger carrying a worn backpack. Claire glanced at the time once more and took another step toward the empty sidewalk. "I should get going. Lily wakes up early, even when I wish she would sleep another hour." Ethan watched her begin the long walk into the rain, every instinct telling him that letting her disappear into the darkness was somehow the wrong ending to a story that had only just begun. Claire had only taken a dozen steps before the sound of tires moving slowly across wet pavement reached her ears. A yellow taxi pulled quietly alongside the curb, its headlights reflecting across the rain-darkened street. She stopped, confused, and looked toward the driver as the passenger window lowered. "Are you Claire?" the driver asked politely. She hesitated before nodding. "Someone already covered the fare. He said to make sure you get home safely." Claire turned around immediately. Ethan was still standing beneath the bus shelter, one hand tucked into the pocket of his charcoal coat, the other holding his folded umbrella. Their eyes met across the quiet street. Claire walked back several steps, rain collecting on her shoulders before she reached the shelter again. "You did not have to do this," she said softly. Ethan smiled with quiet sincerity. "Perhaps not, but I wanted to." Claire shook her head gently. "I cannot accept expensive favors from strangers." Ethan looked toward the waiting taxi before answering. "Then do not think of it as a favor." He paused for a brief moment. "Think of it as one tired commuter noticing another tired commuter." Claire lowered her eyes for a second, clearly struggling between gratitude and pride. "I will be all right," she insisted. "You probably would," Ethan replied calmly. "But someone is waiting for you to make pancakes before sunrise. I would rather not let 6 miles of rain decide whether that promise becomes harder to keep." His words surprised her. She had almost forgotten mentioning Lily only moments earlier. Ethan had remembered every detail. Claire looked toward the taxi once more before letting out a slow breath. "You are making it difficult to refuse." Ethan smiled. "That was not my intention." She laughed quietly for the first time that evening, a genuine laugh that briefly erased the exhaustion from her face. "It may have been. Another silence settled comfortably between them as the rain softened into a gentle drizzle. Finally, Claire nodded. All right. Before climbing into the taxi, she reached into her backpack and removed a small notebook. Tearing out a clean page, she quickly wrote a phone number before holding it toward Ethan. If you tell me how much the ride costs, I will pay you back. Ethan glanced at the paper but did not take it. I believe some things do not need to be repaid. Claire folded the page again. Everything should be repaid. Ethan answered with the same calm expression. Then someday help someone who needs it more than I do. Claire looked at him carefully, as though trying to understand why someone dressed in an expensive suit would speak so simply. You really believe kindness works that way? She asked. Ethan thought for only a moment. I hope it does. Claire smiled warmly before opening the taxi door. Then I hope life returns today's kindness to you when you least expect it. The driver closed the trunk after placing her backpack inside, and within seconds the taxi pulled away from the quiet street. Ethan watched the taillights disappear into the rainy Chicago night until they became nothing more than two distant red reflections. Only then did he realize he still knew almost nothing about the woman whose quiet determination had unsettled every assumption he had made during years of measuring success. He knew she worked more than one job. He knew she had a 5-year-old daughter named Lily waiting at home. He knew she believed promises to children mattered more than personal comfort. And somehow, those simple truths felt more valuable than most conversations he had held inside executive boardrooms. As Ethan finally turned to leave, one thought refused to leave his mind. Those two payroll statements had not told the story of a woman chasing money. They had revealed a mother doing everything possible to protect a little girl's ordinary tomorrow. And for reasons he could not yet explain, he knew this would not be the last time their paths crossed. The next afternoon, the rain had disappeared, leaving Chicago wrapped in crisp autumn sunlight that reflected brightly from rows of downtown office windows. Ethan spent most of the day inside conference rooms where conversations revolved around quarterly projections, investment strategies, and expansion plans worth millions of dollars. Executives debated percentages with impressive confidence, while polished presentations filled enormous screens. Yet more than once, Ethan found himself remembering a young mother who had measured an evening not by profit, but by whether she would be home in time to make pancakes before dawn. By early evening, after another meeting ended later than expected, he decided to stop at a neighborhood grocery store a few blocks from his office instead of asking someone else to shop for him. The store was busy with families filling carts after work. Children pointed excitedly toward colorful cereal boxes while soft music drifted through the aisles. Ethan picked up a few basic groceries before walking toward the checkout lanes. That was when he noticed a familiar voice. "Take your time, Mrs. Harper," Claire said warmly while carefully placing canned soup and fresh vegetables into reusable shopping bags. "The eggs are on top, so they will not break before you get home." An elderly woman smiled gratefully. "You always remember." Claire answered with a gentle laugh. "You remind me every Tuesday, so it helps." Ethan remained several customers away, quietly observing without interrupting. Claire wore the same navy blazer he had seen on the bus, although now a green grocery store apron covered the front. Despite standing for what was clearly another long shift, she greeted every customer with the same calm patience. A father struggling to keep his restless toddler entertained accidentally dropped a carton of yogurt onto the floor. Before anyone else reacted, Claire walked around the register with paper towels and reassuring words. "Please do not worry," she said. "Accidents happen." She handed the little boy a clean sticker shaped like a smiling apple, and within seconds the child stopped looking embarrassed and started smiling instead. Moments later, a college student searched every pocket for enough money to complete his purchase after realizing he had miscalculated the total. Claire quietly removed one promotional item from the order, reducing the cost by only a few dollars while helping him keep everything else. "This one goes on sale tomorrow anyway," she said kindly. "You can always come back for it." The young man thanked her repeatedly before leaving with visible relief. Ethan noticed something else that no one around him seemed to see. Claire never hurried anyone. She never looked frustrated. She treated the customer buying a single loaf of bread with exactly the same respect as the family pushing an overflowing shopping cart. When Ethan finally reached her register, Claire looked up while scanning another item before recognition slowly appeared across her face. Her tired expression softened into genuine surprise. "You are the commuter from last night," she said with an unmistakable smile. Ethan returned the smile. "And you made it home in time for breakfast." Claire nodded proudly. Lily said the pancakes were perfect. She carefully placed a carton of milk into one of his grocery bags before adding, "She also told me they tasted better because I looked happier." Ethan felt himself smiling more than he usually did in public. Children notice things adults often miss. Claire looked toward the next customer already waiting in line. "They do." Then, lowering her voice slightly, she added, "Thank you again. Not only for the taxi, for believing that getting home mattered." Ethan paid for his groceries, but as he walked toward the exit, he realized something far more valuable had happened inside that ordinary neighborhood store. Claire Bennett had not simply been working another shift. She had quietly spent the evening making complete strangers feel seen, respected, and a little less alone. And somehow she accomplished all of that while carrying burdens that most people would never even notice. The image of Claire calmly helping strangers stayed with Ethan long after he returned to the glass tower that carried the Brooks Capital name across its entrance. The following Monday morning, the city below his office windows moved with its usual urgency as thousands of commuters hurried through intersections with coffee cups in hand. Inside the executive floor, however, Ethan found himself distracted. Financial reports covered his desk, yet his thoughts kept returning to the quiet confidence of a woman who had never once complained despite carrying more responsibility than most people could imagine. He pressed the intercom on his desk. "Amanda, could you come in for a moment?" His executive assistant entered carrying a tablet and notebook. "Good morning, Ethan." He leaned back in his chair for a brief moment before speaking carefully. "I would like you to help me find someone." Amanda raised an eyebrow with polite curiosity. "A business contact?" Ethan shook his head. "Not exactly. Her name is Claire Bennett." He paused, choosing his words with care. "I met her by chance. I am not asking for anything private. Only information, that is. Publicly available. Employment history. Professional background. Education. If she has a public professional profile, I would like to see it." Amanda nodded without asking unnecessary questions. "I will keep it within publicly available records." Less than an hour later, she returned carrying a slim folder. "There is more here than I expected," she said before placing it on Ethan's desk. Ethan opened the file and immediately noticed an impressive resume attached to a public professional profile. Claire Bennett had graduated with honors from the University of Illinois Chicago with a degree in accounting nearly 7 years earlier. During her first 3 years after graduation, she had worked for a respected regional accounting firm where performance reviews consistently described her as dependable, analytical, and exceptionally detail-oriented. Then the record changed. Full-time accounting disappeared. Short-term administrative positions followed. Retail employment, evening shifts, weekend work, seasonal jobs. Ethan quietly continued reading. Public records showed that Claire had stepped away from her accounting career shortly after her mother developed serious health complications. Over the next several years, she became both caregiver and single parent while raising Lily after her marriage ended amicably before Lily's second birthday. There were no lawsuits, no financial scandals, no dramatic headlines, only years filled with ordinary sacrifices that rarely attracted anyone's attention. Amanda gently pointed toward another page. "There is one more thing." Ethan looked down and saw that Claire had recently enrolled in evening classes to complete additional certification required to return to professional accounting. Her attendance record was perfect. She had passed every examination on the first attempt. "She has been studying after work?" Ethan asked quietly. Amanda nodded. "According to the community college schedule, classes finish close to 9:30 in the evening. Based on her work hours, she is balancing 2 jobs and coursework." Ethan slowly closed the folder. Suddenly, the 2 payroll statements on the bus made complete sense. They had never represented desperation alone. They represented a carefully constructed bridge toward a better future. Claire was not simply trying to survive another month. She was investing every extra hour she possessed into rebuilding the career she had once been forced to leave behind. Ethan stood and walked toward the wide office window overlooking Chicago. Thousands of people filled the sidewalks below, each carrying stories invisible to everyone around them. He realized that talent was often easy to recognize inside polished offices, but character was usually discovered somewhere far less comfortable. Looking back at Claire's file one final time, he quietly smiled. For the first time in many years, he was not interested in finding another impressive employee. He was interested in making sure that someone who had refused to give up on herself would finally be given a fair chance to finish the journey she had already worked so hard to begin. 3 weeks passed with the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. Every weekday began before sunrise for Claire. She prepared breakfast for Lily, walked her to kindergarten, worked her morning administrative job, attended evening accounting classes twice a week, and finished several nights behind the register at the neighborhood grocery store. The schedule left very little room for rest. Yet somehow she continued greeting every person with the same gentle patience Ethan had witnessed on the day they met. One Tuesday evening, after finishing a meeting nearby, Ethan decided to stop at the public library where Amanda had mentioned Claire attended her certification review sessions. The historic building glowed warmly against the cool autumn evening, its reading rooms filled with students, professionals, and retirees quietly turning pages beneath rows of brass lamps. Ethan walked slowly through the main hall carrying a book he had genuinely intended to borrow, but his attention drifted toward one of the study tables near the back. Claire sat surrounded by accounting textbooks, notebooks covered with carefully organized calculations, and several sharpened pencils lined neatly beside a reusable coffee cup. Her blazer rested across the back of the chair while she concentrated on a page filled with financial statements. Every few minutes, she paused to highlight another section before solving practice problems with remarkable focus. She looked tired, but never distracted. Across from her sat an elderly man struggling to understand an online government benefits form on one of the public computers. Claire noticed his frustration almost immediately. Without interrupting her own work, she quietly stood and walked over. "Would you like me to help?" she asked with the same kindness Ethan had come to recognize. The gentleman smiled with relief. "Only if I am not interrupting your studying." Claire shook her head. "You are not interrupting anything that cannot wait 5 minutes." She patiently explained each section of the application, reading every question slowly until he understood where to enter the information. When the form was finally submitted, the man thanked her several times. Claire simply smiled. "I hope everything works out." Then she returned to her textbooks exactly where she had left them, never expecting recognition for the small act of kindness. Ethan remained several shelves away, pretending to browse books while quietly observing. He realized she had given away precious study time even though every minute mattered. Helping someone else had come as naturally to her as breathing. Nearly an hour later, the library announced it would close in 15 minutes. Claire carefully packed her notebooks into the familiar backpack Ethan recognized immediately. As she turned toward the exit, she nearly bumped into him standing beside the circulation desk. Surprise quickly became another warm smile. "I did not expect to see you here," she said. Ethan held up the book in his hand. "I could say the same thing." Claire laughed softly. "This place has the best study tables in the city, and they stay open later than most coffee shops." Ethan glanced toward the stack of accounting books. "How is the certification going?" She looked down modestly before answering. "The final examination is next month. I still have a lot to learn, but I am getting closer." Ethan admired the quiet confidence in her voice. There was hope there now, not just endurance. As they stepped outside together, the evening air carried the familiar chill of another Chicago autumn night. Claire looked toward the bus stop and smiled. "Do not worry," she joked gently. "I promise I will stay awake this time." Ethan laughed, perhaps more freely than he had in years. Watching her walk toward the waiting bus with her books held tightly against her side, he understood something that every business school in the country failed to teach. The strongest people were not always the loudest or the wealthiest. Sometimes they were simply the ones who kept moving forward with kindness, even after life had given them every reason to become bitter. The morning Claire sat for her certification examination began long before sunrise. She quietly prepared oatmeal and fresh fruit for Lily before helping her button a tiny blue sweater for kindergarten. "You are going to do great today," Lily said with complete confidence while wrapping her small arms around her mother's waist. Claire smiled and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I hope so." Lily looked up with the certainty that only children possess. "You studied every night. Good things happen to people who do not give up." Those simple words stayed with Claire throughout the day. Hours later, She walked out of the testing center carrying nothing but her backpack and cautious optimism. She knew she had done her best, yet she refused to celebrate before receiving the official results. 2 weeks later, an email arrived while she was finishing paperwork during her morning administrative job. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the message. She had passed. Not only had she passed, she had earned one of the highest scores in her testing group. Claire closed her eyes and quietly whispered, "Thank you." That evening, Lily insisted they celebrate with homemade grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup because, according to her, the best parties happen at home. Claire laughed as they ate together around their small kitchen table, surrounded by coloring books and school papers taped proudly to the refrigerator. Across the city, Ethan received a quarterly workforce report during a leadership meeting at Brooks Financial Services. One section highlighted the company's growing need for experienced accountants as several senior employees prepared for retirement. Human Resources proposed increasing recruitment efforts at large firms to attract candidates with prestigious resumes. Ethan listened carefully before asking a different question. How many qualified people are we overlooking because their careers took unexpected turns? The conference room grew quiet. Several executives exchanged uncertain looks. Ethan continued calmly. Life does not always move in straight lines. Someone who stepped away from a profession to care for family may bring more resilience than someone whose resume appears perfect. Amanda recognized the quiet inspiration behind those words, but said nothing. By the end of the meeting, Ethan approved a new initiative expanding opportunities for professionals returning to the workforce after significant career interruptions. Every applicant would complete the same evaluations, interviews, and technical assessments. Standards would remain high, but potential would be measured alongside experience. A week later, Brooks Financial Services posted several accounting positions through public employment websites, community college career centers, and professional organizations. Claire discovered one of those listings while searching for entry-level accounting opportunities after putting Lily to bed. She read every requirement carefully. The position seemed almost beyond her reach. The company was respected throughout the financial industry. Thousands of applicants would likely compete for only a handful of openings. She nearly closed the posting before remembering Lily's words from the examination morning. Good things happen to people who do not give up. Taking a slow breath, Claire updated her resume, attached her newly earned certification, and wrote a thoughtful cover letter explaining not excuses, but growth. She described how years spent balancing work, parenting, and caregiving had strengthened her discipline, organization, and commitment to serving others. Before clicking the final submission button, she looked toward Lily, sleeping peacefully down the hallway. "No matter what happens," she whispered softly, "I kept my promise to keep moving forward." Hundreds of applications entered Brooks Financial Services that week, each carrying different dreams and different stories. Among them was one resume that Ethan quietly hoped would arrive, not because he intended to offer special treatment, but because he believed that for the first time in many years, someone who had already proven her character deserved nothing less than an honest opportunity to prove her talent. The invitation arrived on a quiet Wednesday afternoon while Claire was organizing invoices at her administrative job. She opened the email twice before believing what she was reading. Brooks Financial Services had invited her to an in-person interview the following Monday. She smiled so brightly that her supervisor noticed immediately. "Good news?" he asked. Claire nodded, trying not to become emotional. "A chance," she answered softly. "Nothing more than a chance." Over the next several days, she prepared with the same discipline that had carried her through every difficult season of life. Each evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Claire reviewed accounting standards, practiced interview questions, and carefully pressed the only navy suit she owned. It was several years old, but she kept it spotless. On Monday morning, she arrived at the Brooks Financial Services headquarters nearly 30 minutes early. The lobby reflected quiet elegance rather than unnecessary luxury. Sunlight poured through towering glass windows while employees greeted visitors with genuine professionalism. Claire checked in at the reception desk, accepted a visitor badge, and took a seat beside several other candidates waiting for interviews. Some reviewed notes on tablets, while others quietly rehearsed answers beneath their breath. Claire simply folded her hands together and reminded herself that no matter what happened, she had already accomplished something she once believed impossible. A recruiter soon escorted her to a conference room where 3 interviewers welcomed her warmly. They asked thoughtful questions about financial reporting, reconciliation, ethics, and problem-solving. Claire answered carefully, drawing not only from textbooks, but also from years spent balancing impossible schedules with careful attention to detail. When asked how she handled pressure, she smiled gently. Pressure taught me to prioritize people without sacrificing accuracy. Numbers matter because they represent real lives. One interviewer nodded with visible appreciation before moving to the final case study. Nearly 90 minutes later, the formal interview concluded. "Thank you for your time," the recruiter said. "Someone will meet you before you leave." Claire assumed there would be paperwork or a brief tour. Instead, she was guided toward the executive floor. The elevator doors opened onto a quiet hallway lined with photographs celebrating decades of company history. At the end of the corridor stood a familiar figure beside an office overlooking the Chicago skyline. Ethan Brooks smiled as Claire slowly approached, surprise spreading across her face. For several long seconds, she simply stared. "It was you," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "Yes." Claire looked from him to the company name displayed discreetly beside the office entrance, and then back again. "You never told me." Ethan smiled kindly. "You never asked." She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "The man on the bus." Ethan nodded once more. "The commuter who was worried about missing breakfast." Claire smiled despite herself. "I cannot believe this." Ethan invited her into his office, where 2 comfortable chairs faced the city below. He remained standing rather than taking his place behind the large executive desk. "I want you to know something before Human Resources finishes their evaluation," he said. "Your interview panel does not report to me. They made their own assessment based entirely on your qualifications." Claire listened quietly. "I did not ask anyone to favor you," Ethan continued. "In fact, I specifically asked them not to tell me anything until your interview was complete." Claire looked relieved. "Thank you." Ethan reached into a drawer and removed 2 familiar payroll statements, carefully protected inside a transparent folder. Claire recognized them immediately and covered her mouth in astonishment. "You kept them?" Ethan nodded. "Not because they represented hardship." He looked at her with quiet respect. "Because they reminded me that determination is sometimes hidden inside ordinary pieces of paper. Those payroll statements told me someone was fighting for a better future before anyone else bothered to notice." Claire's eyes filled with grateful emotion as she looked out across the city skyline. In that moment, she realized the greatest opportunity before her was not simply a new job. It was being seen for the person she had quietly become, while the rest of the world had only noticed how tired she looked. 3 days later, Claire received another email from Brooks Financial Services. She opened it during her lunch break, expecting either another interview or a polite rejection. Instead, she found a formal offer welcoming her as a staff accountant beginning the following month. She read every line twice before tears quietly gathered in her eyes. After years of balancing 2 jobs, late-night classes, and endless sacrifices, the future she had been rebuilding one careful step at a time was finally waiting for her. That evening, she picked Lily up from kindergarten carrying a small paper bag from a neighborhood bakery. "Did something special happen?" Lily asked as they walked hand in hand beneath trees painted with the colors of late autumn. Claire smiled through joyful tears. "I got the new job." Lily stopped walking for a second before throwing her arms around her mother. "I knew they would pick you," she said with complete confidence. "You always help people." Claire laughed softly. That was not exactly the interview question. Lily looked up with innocent certainty. Maybe it should be. The following month brought changes that seemed almost unbelievable. Claire no longer rushed from one job to another. She could eat dinner with Lily nearly every evening, help with kindergarten art projects, and read bedtime stories without constantly checking the time. At Brooks Financial Services, she quickly earned the respect of her teammates, not because she spoke the loudest, but because she listened carefully, solved problems patiently, and treated every coworker with the same kindness she had once shown strangers at a grocery store checkout. Ethan watched quietly as she became exactly the professional he had believed she could be, never asking for recognition and never forgetting where she had come from. Several months later, during a company meeting celebrating employee achievements, Claire received an award recognizing exceptional collaboration and service. When invited to say a few words, She stood before hundreds of colleagues and smiled with quiet humility. The greatest opportunities in my life did not begin when someone believed I was successful, she said. They began when someone believed I was worth noticing before I was. The room responded with warm applause, but Ethan remained silent for a moment, knowing those words carried far more meaning than anyone else could fully understand. Winter slowly gave way to spring. One evening, after finishing work, Claire boarded a city bus on her way home. The ride felt strangely familiar. Near the back sat a young mother asleep with a small backpack resting on her lap. A folded daycare receipt and several work schedules slipped onto the seat beside her as the bus approached its final stop. Claire looked at the papers, then smiled to herself. She gently walked over and spoke in the same calm voice she had once heard on another rainy night. "Excuse me, this is the last stop." The young woman opened her eyes in confusion before quickly gathering the papers with embarrassed apologies. Claire helped collect them without asking questions or making assumptions. Outside, the evening air carried the gentle warmth of a new season. The young mother looked around uncertainly before admitting she had missed her connection home. Claire quietly opened a rideshare application on her phone. "Please let me take care of this," she said kindly. "Someone once helped me get home when I needed it most." The young mother hesitated before whispering, "How can I ever repay you?" Claire smiled as she remembered a rainy night, 2 payroll statements, and a stranger who had seen her before anyone else had. "Someday," she answered softly, "when life gives you the chance, help someone else." As the car disappeared into the evening, Claire continued walking home beneath the fading sunlight, knowing that the greatest investment was never measured in dollars, promotions, or titles. It was measured by the quiet moments when one act of kindness became another, until hope traveled farther than the people who first carried it.